Great to be back again on another edition of Secular de CISO. And this time around, we're going to be talking about risk realities, focusing around the fintech and fintech innovation. And I have the pleasure to host Vaithi Subramanian, a longtime friend of mine who has worked alongside with me at ISC2 Chennai chapter. He has held significant key roles in the chapter. I would say he was one of the key pillars at the time when we started the chapter in Chennai, the first chapter to be started in India. He also functions as the head of enterprise risk management, NIAM, and he also has over 15 years of experience, and he has worked with global brands such as EY, Stanchart, Cognizant, and there's a lot of other organizations which he has worked as well, but he carries a lot of experience. And he's also a CISSP and a CISA. Vaithi, thank you so much for taking time to be here.
Thank you so much, Sujit. It's a pleasure connecting with you after a long time.
So, getting straight into the conversation, the talk of the town in the last few years is about startup, innovation, or innovation and startup. I mean, it goes in that loop. And one of the key industries which has been heavily focused on innovation is the fintech industry or the financial or BFSI industry. And because technology is being used as an enabler, people call it fintech. So I'd like you to give our viewers, our audience, a context of what this fintech industry is about, the innovation, and a little bit of background. And for the viewers, I would also like to tell you that we're going to be doing this in 2 or 3 parts, where we're going to be talking about the background to the fintech industry, and then we would also look at threat landscape and risk realities. That would be in second part. And the third part, the most important part, I would say, the API. APIs are being used as an enabler, and how does it brings in opportunities and risks to the organizations. And finally, the CISOs challenges. Vaidhi, if you can just walk us through briefly in terms of the context.
Thank you, Sujit. Right. So just to start with, right. So what is fintech is all about? Right? It's just fusion between finance and technology, right? Uh, Especially in the last 15 years or so, we've seen a significant disruption in the technology world, right? So eventually, there are some untapped areas where technology was not efficient use. One of them was finances. I'm talking about, like, say, in 2009 and 10. And that is when people started exploring how we can actually marry both finance and technology. And that gave rise to a lot of these fintechs, right? So fintechs are not chartered institutions per se. So they support a majority of the banks, particularly at the back end from a technology perspective. So that's how they started their journey with. And eventually, they started getting their own licenses. That primarily because of the regulatory pressure in some of the nations that they are operating in, and that's where it started. And today, if you look at globally, there are close to 20,000 plus fintechs, right? And pretty much in all of the fields, like, say, for example, whether it's a pay-in, a payout, or lending, and all of that. So there are a lot of fintechs globally operating in multiple markets, right? Gone all those days where where you have to send the money from one part of the country another part of the country, where it takes 2 days, 3 days for your money to get credited in the account, right? So now it just happens real time in most of the markets, thanks to fintech, right? So that's where it really helped. And another topic I also wanted to kind of touch upon is globally, if you look at in terms of the fintech adoption rate, right? I just want to kind of let the viewers understand how big this market is now and how big the market is going to be for fintech, right? So there are two parts. One is the unbanked population, another is an underbanked population. Right? An unbanked population is people who do not have a bank account, right? And there are close to 40% of the people globally who do not have a bank account itself. So they are the unbanked population. And primarily, these people are based out of the Latin American countries or the African countries. The second is the underbanked population. The underbanked population refers to those people who do not efficiently use the digital banking services, right? So these are two segments. So now, the focus area, particularly even from a government perspective, to improve the financial inclusion in the respective countries, they are focusing on the unbanked population and equally on the underbanked population, especially in areas like Africa and Latin American countries. And that is where these fintechs really help the government by working alongside banks in terms of opening up accounts for the people in these countries and eventually selling their products as well. So over the next 7 to 8 years, there's going to be a huge disruption in terms of this fintech expanding its horizons, particularly in Africa and Latin American countries. So that's a quick intro about how big this fintech industry is and how big it's going to be in the near future. Yes, Sujit.
Thank you, Vaithi. I mean, that gives a perspective, right? It's a lot of opportunity. So I guess the question people may ask is 20,000 plus fintech organization, is it sufficient to bridge the gap of underbanked and unbanked, right? So that's a question we'll probably discuss in another forum. Uh, on the same topic, now, while we are talking about unbanked and underbanked, it might also be related to the literacy levels of people as well, right? And the availability of technology. Uh, I wouldn't be delving into that, but I'm going to take this conversation to the risk or the threat landscape. Does it present an opportunity, or does it present an opportunity to the adversary? Or are we at an advantage, or are we at a disadvantage? Vaithi, what are your views?
Absolutely. That's a pretty good question, right? So, the moment you start talking about money and you start talking about data, right, then there is always a window of opportunity for the adversaries to step in, right? So, as fintechs, they tie up with banks, right, and which means they deal with money. And as far as a majority of the fintechs are concerned, they deal with customers as well. So when I say deal with customers, they have the data from the customers. So the moment you have customer data and money tagging along, then that becomes an area to actually exploit, particularly from an adversary standpoint, right? So that's where it presents a I won't call it as a big a challenge, but rather it's something to kind of look for from a fintech perspective to see how they actually address these threats that are actually going to have an impact. As I said, just coming back to the discussion point that we had earlier, right? Especially on the 20,000 plus fintechs. Uh, Going forward, right, at least like say probably another 5 years, 6 years down the line, there'll be a lot of consolidation that will happen globally, right? So there'll be like fintechs that'll be bought, there'll be like organic growth or inorganic growth of the fintech companies in these different regions. So the moment you start integrating your technology and your processes, so eventually you also need to deal with how you're going to kind of take the customers of like say fintech A into fintech B, right? So what are the challenges there in terms of integrating the technologies and all that? So those are areas where primarily from a risk perspective, it needs a lot of time to understand how we actually merge these technologies and all that. But eventually, as I said, from a fintech perspective, uh, a typical enterprise risk components that would apply to any financial industry or any financial institution, be it an operational risk, be it a regulatory risk, be it a cybersecurity risk, all of these would apply to a fintech industry as well. Yes, sir.
Right. So 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 it's no different, right? So we are talking about the same threats, but this fintech industry is more attractive to the threat advisories because you have two sets of data. One is the customer PII data, the other one is the money. So this becomes a potential target for them. So you've been handling risk for NIA. right? And I'm sure you're working with various other organizations, and even in your past functions, you mainly handled risk. What do you see as the biggest challenge for the CISOs?
I think the challenge for the CISOs has significantly transformed than what it was 10 years back vis-a-vis now, right? Because now with majority of the fintechs have an open cloud architecture, right? And either it's on AWS, Google Cloud, or whatever it is, right? So they move in there. And apparently, a majority of the functions are also outsourced to different parties. It's because of the cost that they have. And alongside the advantages, the economic advantages they have, they also present a cybersecurity a risk as well. So primarily, today's CISOs are actually getting involved in almost all of these discussions, right from contracting a particular company for, like, say, if I'm going to kind of outsource my HR function. So the CISO gets in at the contract stage to understand what data are we going to kind of give to this particular company. How are they going to handle it? Where the data is going to be stored? Mind you, I mean, today's fintech companies are like across the globe, right? So, for example, if they are in the EU or in the UK and all that, so you attract the GDPR regulations as well. So you need to be absolutely careful about how you actually handle data. That's one. Secondly, as I was saying, the growth of fintechs has been phenomenal. So as the growth of the security products in companies, right? So you would confirm to this, Sujit, that at least like 20 years back, there were only like handful of security companies and products that were actually sold. So the CISOs were like relatively in a comfortable position to decide that I have to kind of pick between A, B, C, D, and E. But now there are like close to 15,000 plus security products in the market who's trying to kind of sell you what they have. So it becomes absolutely imperative for the CISOs to do a risk assessment to check like what the company actually wants vis-a-vis what the product offers, because there have been a lot of challenges. And I just want to kind of give an example of one challenge that I had in my previous stint, in a bank, wherein we had developed certain use cases of what we actually want, and we went with these use cases A, B, C, D, and E. uh, the way these solution companies come about and say this is A, B, and C falls into license one, D, E, and F falls into license two. So you need A, B, C, D as well for your company. So eventually you're forced to buy license two, but you will not use E and F. For example, like say you want an antivirus solution. The guy would come back and say that no, they have another endpoint solution which he wants to kind of sell. He says if you are going to buy an antivirus solution that's coming with a package where you have to buy the endpoint solution as well, you already would have implemented an endpoint solution, right? You don't need to kind of buy another endpoint solution. So that's where today's CISOs are having a bit of a dilemma in terms of how we go about selecting products, because it's a problem of plenty now. And that's where risk assessment comes into play to kind of make them understand where exactly you need know these cybersecurity products to fit in, what products you have, what is your main ask, who are your adversaries, and how what is the product really kind of solving what the enterprise really needs. So I think that's the kind of dilemma I think most of the CISOs are having currently.
Absolutely, I agree, right? So, too many to select from. And even if you select, you may not get the perfect fit.
Absolutely.
So, the risk dynamics are changing so rapidly, and one product which met your requirement today may not meet it at all in a day or two. So that's how rapidly the landscape is changing. I would like to ask you one more question. Is API a blessing to the CISOs or a curse?
uh 50-50 to be from a technology standpoint, it's an angel, it's a blessing, right? Because I still remember like 25 years back, I could see organizations using API primarily to connect their systems internally. Right now, with this concept of embedded finance, APIs are now becoming a norm, right? So, and that's really the bread and butter. In fact, in most of the fintechs, their know-hows are only around the APIs that they actually develop, right? So we talk about all of these and how it actually brings in a lot of money, but alongside that, how do you maintain and secure our APIs is a very important question. And in fact, during my previous stint with the same bank, Sujit, we used to have an API governing council, which actually meets on a bi-weekly basis to actually see how many APIs are in the pipeline, how many have actually gone live, whether we have adhered to all of those checkpoints when we develop that API. I'm not really sure how many companies today actually have such councils. Maybe it's because it's too much of an investment in terms of resources, but considering the risk that the APIs actually present, right? It becomes absolutely pertinent for companies to actually have some bit of governance around API. And even in NIAM, right? So what we have is something called a secure by design model, right? So right from the time any development that goes into production, be it with APIs or anything, right at the initial stage, we actually do these reviews and then inform the team that these are things that you need to address before you move to the next stage, right? And APIs by itself present a lot of risk now these days, right? And different types of APIs are also there, and how you actually plug these APIs, particularly when it comes to embedded finance, right? So, a lot of APIs that you need to work with. Interoperability is one of the challenge. So in terms of making things easy, we should not actually compromise the cost of security. That's the message that the CISOs today has to actually firmly put on the table when they discuss things with the business teams. So that's something I just wanted to reiterate, Sujit.
Absolutely. And I like your closing where you said convenience should not become a pain later, or it should not come to haunt the organization because there's a lot at stake. Like you have your PII data, your customer data, your transactions. Then you are required to comply to global regulations because when you have a platform or when you have systems which are spread across different continents, you're required to meet every single country's requirement. And
Absolutely.
then, more importantly, I guess what we are talking about protecting the money because I think I remember talking to Dr. Subbarao, the former RBI
Okay.
governor. He said it's not about going digital. It is about ensuring people's hard-earned money is not lost overnight, right? And I appreciate that thought because that's where the roles of risk management, security, cybersecurity, compliance, all these come into play just to ensure that we build confidence in the system. Because when the people are confident about using a system, that means there's a lot of confidence in
There's
the
another beautiful word,
industry.
Sujit. I can just interrupt. Trust, right? So how do you
Absolutely.
develop that trust with people? And even today, when we want to partner with banks and all that, the first thing that is there in that list is asking us for our enterprise risk management framework. How do you effectively manage risk? That becomes a de facto ask in most of these RFPs that we get from our partner banks and the due diligence that happens, right? So it's about how do you establish this trust with people so that they believe that their data as well as their money, importantly, is safe with us. So I think that's very important.
Absolutely. So there are a lot of takeaways from this conversation, Vaidi, for the viewers. Trust, I start with the last concluding thoughts. I think we need to build trust in the way tech is used. Not just fintech, but any tech for that matter, right? We also need to understand how the data flows so that we know every touch point and how the data is accessed and used by whom for what purpose and how long it is being retained or how long it should be retained to meet regulatory requirements. And of course, risk management is a vast topic. What you gave us in this short time is yes, the technology is available, but let's use the best practices in assessing those threats, creating those scenarios, right? So, scenario based risk assessment and continuously reviewing whether the scenario stays good and whether any parameter in the scenario, if it changes, would the risk posture change? So, Wadi, thank you so much for taking time to be with me today and talk about this. As we discussed offline, I'd like to have you again on another topic Maybe we can dwell deep into one of the points we
API,
took, right? Maybe
some
API is a topic which we can
security, yes.
discuss, right? And in depth, we talk about the best practices and maybe even talk about what we should not be doing, right? Negative use cases, right? So with that thought, Vaidi, thank you so much and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.